HOA Karen tries to fine me $300,000, didn't know it was easy for me. Olivia Carter had always dreamed of a peaceful life, away from the chaotic buzz of the city. After years of building her real estate empire, flipping properties, and quietly amassing her fortune, she finally found the perfect home, a charming house in a quiet, upscale neighborhood that promised serenity. The tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and pristine homes were everything she had imagined. It seemed like the perfect place to unwind after the constant demands of the business world. But little did she know, her dream neighborhood would soon turn into a nightmare. Her first morning in the neighborhood was marked by an unexpected visitor. As she unloaded boxes from her car, a woman in a sharp blazer strode up to her driveway, clipboard in hand. Her demeanor was immediately imposing, as though she had come to reprimand a child. "Excuse me, you're the new homeowner, right?" she asked, her voice sharp and demanding. Olivia nodded, trying to remain friendly. "I'm Janet Wilson, president of the HOA?" the woman continued, her eyes scanning Olivia's property with a critical gaze. "I hope you're aware of the neighborhood's strict guidelines. You're already in violation." Before Olivia could respond, Janet slapped a thick envelope into her hands. Inside was a $300,000 fine for several infractions that were completely foreign to her. The grass was too green, her mailbox was incorrectly placed, and the list went on. Janet smirked as Olivia stared in disbelief. This was not what she had envisioned when she moved into this supposed paradise. With a chilling calmness, Olivia realized this wasn't just a case of being unlucky, it was a warning. Janet wasn't just enforcing rules, she was wielding power. And Olivia had just become her target. Olivia's mind raced as she stood on her doorstep, holding the absurd fine in her hands. She had barely moved into the neighborhood, and already, she felt as if she were trapped in some twisted game orchestrated by Janet Wilson. With the fine clutched tightly in her hand, she took a deep breath and resolved to learn more about the situation. Over the next few days, Olivia made it a point to chat with her neighbors, eager to understand the true nature of the community. At first, most were hesitant to speak, eyeing her warily as if worried about the repercussions of voicing any criticism of Janet. But Olivia was patient, and as she shared her own frustrations about the fine, the floodgates began to open. An elderly man named Mr. Dawson, who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, was the first to speak out. "It's been going on for years," he confided, his voice low and filled with regret. "Janet's been running this HOA like it's her own personal empire. If you can't pay the fines, she'll push you into foreclosure. And when you lose your home, she sells it to her friends, always at a price well below market value." Olivia's stomach churned as she listened. She wasn't just dealing with petty rules and fines. This was systemic corruption, and Janet was making a fortune off of it. As Olivia continued to speak with her neighbors, the stories piled up. One couple told her how their backyard fence had been rejected 3 times by the HOA, only for the same type of fence to be approved for Janet's close friend's house. Another neighbor shared how Janet had forced him to pay exorbitant fines simply because his garden was too colorful for the HOA's rigid standards. The pattern was becoming clearer. Janet wasn't merely enforcing rules, she was exploiting them. The fines were just a means to an end, foreclosure. And with each property that was foreclosed upon, Janet was quietly acquiring homes at a fraction of their value, further expanding her influence in the neighborhood. Olivia's blood ran cold. Janet had created an entire racket. And she was taking advantage of the people who trusted her to maintain the community's integrity. Olivia couldn't just stand by anymore, she knew she had to take action. Olivia couldn't believe the depth of Janet's corruption. As the stories from her neighbors continued to surface, it became clear that Janet wasn't just a corrupt HOA president, she was a predator. And the entire neighborhood was her prey. The power she held over the residents, coupled with the control of the HOA, allowed her to run roughshod over everyone. And no one seemed able to fight back. But Olivia wasn't just any homeowner, she had the means and the resources to turn the tables. Drawing on her extensive real estate network, Olivia began making strategic moves. She quietly started acquiring properties in the neighborhood, using shell companies to mask her involvement. At first, the purchases were subtle, just a few here and there. Ones that were about to be foreclosed upon, or those where the owners had grown tired of Janet's rule. But with each new acquisition, Olivia's influence grew. Within a matter of weeks, she had quietly acquired a significant percentage of the homes in the HOA. Enough to hold majority voting power. The subtlety of her approach was critical. Janet had no idea that Olivia was building a silent army of property ownership. Each purchase was calculated. Every negotiation designed to fly under the radar. Olivia wasn't just playing to win a battle, she was preparing for war. But Olivia knew that power alone wouldn't be enough. She needed to collect the smoking gun that would expose Janet's fraudulent activities once and for all. Armed with her connections and an in-depth knowledge of real estate, Olivia dug into the HOA's financial records. She spent countless hours sifting through bank statements, payment receipts, and public documents, carefully piecing together a shocking narrative of manipulation. It didn't take long for her to uncover a disturbing truth. Janet had been funneling HOA fines into personal accounts under the guise of neighborhood improvements. There were no new landscaping projects, no clubhouse renovations, no security upgrades, just a trail of money flowing into Janet's hands and the hands of her cronies. Olivia also discovered a network of foreclosures, all suspiciously involving properties that Janet had acquired through shady deals at well below market value. With the evidence now in hand, Olivia was ready to take the next step. She had quietly seized control of the HOA and gathered the proof of Janet's corruption. It was time to make her move. Olivia wasn't just going to take Janet down, she was going to dismantle her empire piece by piece. And this neighborhood would never be the same again. The day had finally come. Olivia was no longer just a resident of the neighborhood, she was now the most powerful person within the HOA. Armed with irrefutable evidence of Janet's corruption, the moment she had been working toward was within reach. She knew it was time to confront Janet, to expose everything and take control of the HOA once and for all. Olivia carefully prepared for the emergency meeting, knowing that Janet would try to downplay or dismiss any attempt to challenge her authority. She arranged for all the homeowners to be present, sending out notices to ensure the meeting would be packed. There was no way Janet could ignore the growing pressure. The tension in the air was palpable as Olivia walked into the neighborhood clubhouse that evening. Janet was already seated at the head of the table, her usual smug demeanor in place. The other board members sat nearby, most of them loyal to Janet. But a few eyes flicked nervously toward Olivia. Sensing something was off, Olivia stood at the front of the room, feeling the weight of the moment. She was no longer a powerless victim, she had the reins now. She opened the folder she'd been carrying, placing it on the table with a deliberate thud. "I've called this meeting because I have something important to address," she began, her voice steady, commanding. Janet's lips curled into a faint sneer. "Oh. Please," she scoffed. "If you have a complaint, you can file it through the proper channels." Olivia didn't flinch. Instead, she slid a stack of documents in front of Janet, including financial records and bank statements. "These are the records of your activities, Janet," she said, her tone cold but calm. "I've found evidence of money laundering, personal financial benefits from foreclosures, and the embezzlement of HOA fines. The so-called improvements to the neighborhood were just a front to line your pockets." Janet's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she quickly regained her composure. But Olivia saw the cracks in her armor. The other board members were beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Olivia continued. "This is just the beginning. Over the last few weeks, I've acquired enough of the HOA's properties to legally hold a majority vote. You're not in charge here anymore, Janet." She handed out additional documents, showing her ownership of 40% of the homes in the neighborhood, along with a series of purchase agreements for the foreclosed properties that Janet had acquired at absurdly low prices. Janet sputtered, her face flushing a deep shade of red. "This is nonsense," she hissed, slamming her hand against the table. "You can't do this. You don't have the authority." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I do. You've lost control, Janet. I'm calling for your removal as president of this HOA." The room was silent, tension thick as Olivia turned to the other board members, her gaze sharp. "We have the evidence, and I suggest you vote accordingly." One by one, the board members who had once been too afraid to speak up began to clear their throats, their voices tentative but growing in strength. "I vote to remove Janet," said Ted, the treasurer, who had been one of Janet's most loyal allies. "I second that motion," another board member added. The final vote was unanimous. Janet was out. Her reign of power shattered. Olivia didn't feel any satisfaction in the moment. This wasn't about winning. It was about justice. As Janet was escorted out of the room, Olivia sat at the head of the table, the power now in her hands. She looked around at the newly freed homeowners, who were starting to exchange hopeful looks. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was no longer under Janet's oppressive control. Olivia had done more than just remove Janet from the HOA. She had dismantled the very system of fear and corruption that had plagued the community for so long. The game was over. Janet wasn't the type to go down quietly. As soon as she was ousted from her position as HOA president, she vanished from the clubhouse, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Olivia knew this wasn't the last she would hear from Janet. Sure enough, within a few days, Olivia received a thick envelope, another lawsuit. This time from Janet herself. The lawsuit accused Olivia of unlawfully acquiring properties through deceit, undermining the HOA's operations, and violating the HOA's contractual obligations. Janet's accusations were bold, claiming that Olivia's takeover had caused irreparable harm to the community. Olivia read through the documents with a calm demeanor, though inside, she could feel the brewing storm. Janet was trying to claw her way back, and she was willing to drag Olivia through a costly, drawn-out legal battle to do so. But this time, Olivia was ready. At the same time, rumors about Olivia's supposed illegal activities began circulating around the neighborhood. Janet's loyalists, those who had once feared her, began to spread false information about Olivia's role in the HOA's dissolution. Some residents were told that Olivia was simply another corporate raider, eager to make a profit from the community's struggles. Janet had even gone so far as to plant fake violation notices around the neighborhood, accusing Olivia of all sorts of new offenses, including claims that she was falsifying property records and illegally evicting homeowners. It seemed like a last-ditch effort to smear Olivia's name and turn the community against her. Janet was trying to regain control, even if it meant sowing discord and confusion. But Olivia wasn't about to let Janet's tactics stand. She took swift action, launching a counteroffensive that would not only clear her name but expose Janet's lies to the world. First, Olivia called the local news station, offering them an exclusive story with all of Janet's fraudulent documents, bank statements, and the testimonies of residents who had suffered under her regime. Olivia painted a vivid picture of the truth. Janet Wilson wasn't a victim, but a criminal mastermind who had run a racket for years, using her HOA position to line her pockets and bully residents. The news quickly picked up the story, and within hours, every major outlet was covering the expose. Headline after headline blasted Janet's corrupt practices, detailing how she had embezzled HOA funds, orchestrated illegal foreclosures, and manipulated the board for her own gain. The media's scrutiny turned the tide. Janet could no longer hide behind her lies. Her former allies started to distance themselves from her, realizing they couldn't protect her anymore without facing legal consequences themselves. Janet's retaliatory tactics backfired spectacularly. The false fines were dismissed as nothing more than harassment, and the rumors about Olivia were debunked one by one. Local authorities took notice of the public outcry, and soon, the investigation into Janet's financial dealings and fraudulent foreclosures was being handled by the district attorney's office. The community's support for Olivia grew stronger as the truth spread. Residents who had once cowered under Janet's rule now rallied behind Olivia, recognizing her as the hero who had exposed the corruption that had poisoned their neighborhood for years. The more Janet tried to fight back, the more she exposed her own guilt. Olivia had played her hand brilliantly. She had not only protected herself but had turned the narrative around. Janet's last-ditch retaliation had only strengthened Olivia's resolve. And soon enough, the former HOA president was left with nothing but a tarnished reputation and mounting legal troubles. The storm that Janet had stirred up with her retaliation was short-lived. Olivia's swift counterattack had done more than just protect her own reputation. It had unleashed a cascade of consequences for Janet, one that she couldn't escape. The media frenzy, combined with the mounting pressure from the community and the legal system, was unraveling Janet's carefully constructed facade. Within weeks of the investigation being launched, the full scope of Janet's fraudulent activities came to light. The evidence Olivia had gathered, along with the testimonies of residents who had suffered under Janet's reign, proved to be damning. Multiple lawsuits were filed against Janet, each one accusing her of embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of power. As the district attorney's office sifted through the evidence, it became clear that Janet had been siphoning HOA funds for years, falsifying financial records, and even orchestrating illegal foreclosures to acquire properties at dirt-cheap prices. One by one, the authorities began to close in. First, it was the local police, who arrested Janet on charges of embezzlement. Then came the federal investigators, who expanded the probe into a full-scale fraud investigation. It didn't take long for Janet to realize the enormity of the situation. She was facing criminal charges that could send her to prison for years. And there was no one left to protect her. The HOA, once a tool for Janet to wield power over the neighborhood, was officially dissolved. The community that had been terrorized for so long was finally free of the oppressive fines, absurd rules, and corrupt practices that Janet had enforced with an iron fist. The residents, once too afraid to speak out, now united to create a new system, one that was fair, transparent, and focused on community cooperation rather than control. Olivia, who had taken the lead in dismantling the HOA, helped guide the transition to this new, inclusive system. The neighborhood flourished, with homeowners enjoying a renewed sense of freedom and security. As for Janet, her downfall was swift and brutal. Her assets were frozen, and the properties she had illegally acquired were seized. Her reputation, once untouchable, was now in tatters. No one in the real estate world wanted to touch her, and the connections she had built over the years quickly evaporated. After being convicted of embezzlement and fraud, Janet found herself facing bankruptcy, her ill-gotten wealth stripped away, with her criminal charges mounting, and her professional life shattered. Janet had no choice but to take whatever job she could find. She ended up working as a receptionist in a rundown property management office, a far cry from the powerful HOA president she once was. She could no longer walk the streets with the same air of superiority. The very people she had once lorded over were now living in a neighborhood free from her control. For Olivia, watching Janet's humiliation was bittersweet. The victory wasn't just in dismantling the HOA or exposing Janet's crimes, it was in the lasting change she had created. The neighborhood had been freed, and the power had shifted back into the hands of the people who truly cared about their community. Janet, now a shadow of her former self, could only look on in silent rage as the life she had built crumbled. The queen of the neighborhood had fallen, and the consequences of her greed and corruption were now inescapable. Olivia's actions had restored justice, and the neighborhood that had once suffered under Janet's reign was finally at peace. As Janet's empire crumbled, it became clear that no one, no matter how powerful they seemed, could escape the consequences of their actions. Olivia's determination, resourcefulness, and unwavering pursuit of justice not only freed the community but also showed that standing up for what's right can lead to true change. What do you think about the story? Do you believe HOAs should have this much power? Have you ever experienced something similar or dealt with a Karen of your own? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more insane real estate battles and HOA dramas, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means a lot and helps me bring you even more incredible stories in the future. Stay tuned for more.